He thought the groceries were stolen. What he really stole was his own future. Rain slid down the windows of the Midtown Fresh Market in long silver lines, turning the parking lot lights into blurred halos across the wet pavement. Inside, the store hummed with the ordinary sounds of a Thursday evening in America. Shopping carts rattling over tile, scanners chirping at checkout lanes, tired parents bargaining with children over cereal boxes, and the low murmur of strangers trying to get home before the storm worsened. Near aisle 7, beside shelves of canned soup and discounted bread, an elderly man in a charcoal overcoat studied a carton of eggs with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that rushing solves very little. Harold Bennett was 74 years old, tall but slightly stooped, with silver hair trimmed close and glasses resting low on his nose. He moved carefully, not weakly, but with the measured precision of a man who respected every step. In his basket sat a loaf of wheat bread, a gallon of milk, 2 bananas, oatmeal, and a bouquet of yellow flowers wrapped in clear plastic. Nothing extravagant, nothing unusual, yet some people are judged long before they speak. Across the store, Officer Ryan Cole stood near the automatic doors, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. He was 36, broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had mistaken authority for wisdom. He had been called to the market for what Dispatch labeled a possible shoplifting concern. A vague complaint. No witness statement. No confirmed loss. Just suspicion floating through the air, looking for somewhere to land. Ryan's eyes scanned the store once, then stopped on Harold. The old man's coat was damp from the rain. His shoes were polished, but worn. His basket was small. To Ryan, that was enough. He strode down the aisle, boots clicking against the tile, drawing glances before he said a word. Harold noticed him approaching and calmly placed the eggs into his basket. "Sir," Ryan said, voice loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Step away from the cart." Several heads turned instantly. A young cashier froze mid-scan. A mother pulled her son closer. Harold lifted his eyes slowly, not startled, not angry, simply attentive. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked in a deep, even tone. Ryan ignored the question. "Store manager says items may have been concealed. I'm going to need to inspect your cart and your pockets." The aisle went quiet in that special way public spaces do when strangers sense humiliation coming. Harold looked at the basket, then back at Ryan. "Everything here is unpaid because I am still shopping." A nervous laugh came from somewhere near the cereal section. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Don't get smart with me." Harold removed his glasses, wiped a drop of rain from the lens, and returned them to his face. "Young man," he said gently, "I'm being clear, not smart." That answer only sharpened Ryan's irritation. Some people cannot stand calm when they arrive expecting fear. He reached for the cart handle and pulled it away. The flowers tipped sideways. The milk wobbled. A child gasped. Phones quietly began to rise. "Hands where I can see them," Ryan ordered. Harold raised both hands without resistance. Palms open, his expression unchanged. There was dignity in the motion, the kind no uniform can grant and no accusation can remove. "This is unnecessary," said an older woman near the bread aisle. Ryan didn't look at her. "Ma'am, mind your business." Harold glanced toward her and gave the smallest shake of his head, as if protecting even strangers from escalation. Then he turned back to Ryan. "Officer, before this goes further, I suggest you look inside the left pocket of my wallet." Ryan smirked. "You don't make suggestions here." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, every sound seemed to disappear. Harold's eyes did not move. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly the problem." Ryan Cole stared at the old man for a long second, the kind of stare meant to establish control when words begin to fail. Around them, shoppers pretended to browse shelves they had already passed twice, their attention fixed on aisle 7 through reflections in freezer doors and the black screens of phones held low. Rain tapped harder against the storefront glass. Somewhere near checkout lane 3, a scanner beeped and then stopped, as if even the machines were listening. Ryan set his cold coffee on a stack of paper towels and stepped closer. "Wallet," he said. "Now." Harold Bennett nodded once and reached slowly inside his coat. Careful, deliberate, never dramatic. He removed a worn leather wallet and held it out between 2 fingers. The gesture was steady enough to make Ryan feel rushed. He snatched it, flipped it open, and began searching with the impatience of someone certain he would be proven right. A driver license, several neatly folded receipts, a family photo, edges softened by time. Ryan smirked when he found no cash. Interesting, he muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Traveling light tonight. Harold said nothing. He simply watched. Ryan opened the left pocket. His expression did not collapse all at once. It tightened first, then froze, then changed into something harder to hide than anger. There, tucked behind a membership card, was an official identification card embossed with the state seal. The lettering was clear even from several feet away. Honorable Harold Bennett, Senior Circuit Judge. Ryan blinked once, then again, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something easier. They did not. The young cashier near the front register covered her mouth. The older woman by the bread aisle straightened slowly, vindicated but silent. A man recording with his phone lowered it halfway, stunned by how quickly certainty can turn into embarrassment. Ryan snapped the wallet shut. Could be fake, he said, though the conviction had leaked from his voice. Harold tilted his head slightly. Then I suggest you call the courthouse and ask who signs half the warrants in this district. The sentence landed softly, but it moved through the aisle like thunder. Ryan looked toward the automatic doors, then back at the crowd now pretending not to stare. He hated witnesses when they were no longer on his side. Why did you not identify yourself sooner? He demanded. Harold answered without raising his tone. Because respect should not require credentials. No one spoke. Even the child who had gasped earlier stood perfectly still beside a cart full of cereal boxes. Ryan shifted his weight and reached for authority the way some men reach for a railing in the dark. You matched a complaint. Harold nodded. Then investigate the complaint. Do not manufacture guilt to fit it. The store manager, a nervous man named Carl Peterson, hurried down the aisle wiping his hands on his apron though they were already dry. Officer, maybe we should clear this up privately, he said. Ryan shot him a sharp look. Carl immediately regretted having a voice. Harold turned toward the manager with more kindness than the moment deserved. Sir, did you report me for theft? Carl swallowed. No, Your Honor. A customer mentioned concern. I only asked for assistance. Concern, Harold repeated. An expensive word for assumption. Ryan's ears reddened. He handed the wallet back too quickly. Harold accepted it with the same calm he had carried from the beginning and placed it inside his coat. Then he looked down at the tipped flowers, lifted them carefully, and straightened the bent plastic wrap with gentle fingers. That small act unsettled the room more than any shouting could have. Dignity has a way of exposing everyone who lacks it. Outside, flashing lights reflected across the wet pavement as another patrol unit pulled in. Ryan heard the doors slide open behind him. He did not need to turn around to know backup had arrived at the worst possible time. The second patrol officer who entered the store was younger, rain still shining on his shoulders, his expression shifting the moment he saw the circle of silent shoppers in aisle 7. Officer Daniel Mercer slowed when he recognized Harold Bennett. Everyone in the justice system knew the name, even if they had never stood in his courtroom. Some knew him from rulings that defended due process. Others knew him from the rare quality of being firm without cruelty. Daniel removed his cap at once. Your Honor, he said, almost instinctively. The two words struck Ryan harder than any accusation could have. Several phones rose higher. The crowd no longer watched a possible shoplifting call. They were watching a man lose the version of himself he had built in public. Ryan straightened his posture. This situation is under control. Daniel glanced at the overturned basket, the bent flowers, the milk resting sideways near a display of canned beans, then at Harold's calm face. Does not look that way, he said quietly. Ryan's jaw tightened again. I received a complaint. Harold answered before Daniel could. Then perhaps the complaint should be identified. Anonymous suspicion has become far too convenient. Daniel nodded once. He had been an officer only 4 years, but even he understood the sentence carried more than this moment. Carl Peterson, the store manager, stepped forward wringing his hands. The customer is up front, near self-checkout, he said. She insisted the gentleman looked nervous. Harold turned his eyes toward Carl. Did she mention what nervous looks like? Carl had no answer. Ryan spoke sharply. We are not putting the caller on trial. Harold replied in the same measured tone he had used from the start. No, only me, apparently. A ripple moved through the aisle. Not laughter exactly, but the sound people make when truth catches them off guard. Daniel cleared his throat. I can take statements. Ryan snapped. I said it is handled. The younger officer looked at him, then at the phones pointed their way, then back again. With respect, sir, it is already documented. Those words changed the air. Ryan turned and finally noticed just how many cameras were recording. Faces reflected in screens. Strangers preserving seconds that could not be recalled. The confidence drained from his shoulders by degrees. Harold bent carefully, picked up the gallon of milk, and placed it back in the basket. Then he straightened with effort that age demanded but dignity never advertised. Officer Mercer, he said, reading the younger man's nameplate. Would you kindly help me with one practical matter? Yes, sir. Please ask whoever accused me to come stand here beside me. I would like to see whether certainty survives daylight. Carl hesitated. Daniel did not. He headed toward the front of the store. Ryan moved to stop him, then thought better of it. Sometimes the body knows defeat before pride admits it. A minute later, Daniel returned beside a woman in designer rain boots and an expensive cream coat. She looked more offended than ashamed. Her name, Carl explained nervously, was Vanessa Holloway. She folded her arms and glanced at Harold only briefly. I was protecting the store, she said. He kept looking around. Harold nodded. Yes, I was looking for oatmeal. Vanessa lifted her chin. People who belong here do not act like that. Silence fell so completely that the refrigeration units sounded suddenly loud. Daniel looked down. Carl stared at the floor. Ryan said nothing, because there was nothing left that would help him. Harold studied Vanessa with neither anger nor triumph. Ma'am, he said softly, I was born 3 miles from this building before your neighborhood had streetlights. If belonging is what concerns you, perhaps we should discuss history. Her face reddened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Harold turned toward Ryan at last. And you, Officer Cole, had a choice. Every minute since you walked down this aisle, you had a choice. Ryan swallowed. For the first time that night, he looked smaller than his uniform. Rainwater streamed down the front windows in silver ribbons, while no one in Midtown Fresh Market seemed interested in shopping anymore. Carts sat abandoned beside displays of cereal and bottled water. A toddler in a red jacket stared openly from inside a shopping cart seat, sensing what adults often pretend not to notice when truth enters a room. Officer Ryan Cole stood near the tipped basket, shoulders rigid, eyes moving between Harold Bennett, the recording phones, and the woman whose complaint had started everything. Vanessa Holloway now looked at the floor as though tile might offer escape. Harold remained composed, one hand resting lightly on the cart handle, the bouquet of yellow flowers tucked neatly back beside the bread. There was something almost unsettling about how little he needed the moment to go his way. Daniel Mercer broke the silence first. Sir, I am going to document the complaint and the interaction. Ryan turned sharply. You do not need to write this. Up. Daniel met his stare, respectful but steady. Department policy says I do. Ryan had spent years speaking in tones that ended conversations. Tonight, they only exposed him. Carl Peterson stepped closer with the timid urgency of a man desperate to repair what should never have happened. Judge Bennett, your groceries are on the house. Harold looked at him kindly. No, sir. Accountability does not come with coupons. Even Vanessa looked up at that. Harold reached into his coat and removed a checkbook so old-fashioned it felt like another lesson. He wrote carefully, each stroke patient, then handed it to Carl. Ring it properly. Carl accepted it with both hands. The younger cashier wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be seen emotional by strangers. Ryan noticed everything and understood nothing was returning to normal. Then his radio crackled. Dispatch requested status on the call. Ryan hesitated 1 second too long. Daniel answered instead. Scene secure. No crime established. The words landed like a verdict. Several people exhaled at once. Vanessa stiffened. I was only trying to help, she said weakly. Harold turned to her. Help begins with facts. Suspicion dressed as concern has harmed too many people for too long. She opened her mouth, searching for defense, then closed it again. There are moments when language refuses to assist the wrong person. Ryan finally stepped toward Harold, voice lower now. Your Honor, if there was a misunderstanding. Harold raised one hand gently. Not rude, not dramatic, but final. Do not hide choices inside that word. Ryan stopped speaking. The store door slid open and a gust of wet air entered with two suited figures carrying umbrellas. One was Chief Deputy Administrator Ellen Price from City Hall. The other was Assistant Police Chief Leonard Shaw. Their arrival sent a new wave through the crowd. Important people rarely appear this fast unless the damage is already spreading. Leonard Shaw's eyes found Ryan first, then the phones, then Harold. He removed his glasses slowly. "Judge Bennett," he said, voice tight with disbelief. "I came as soon as I saw the footage." Ryan's face drained of color. "Footage?" Shaw looked around the aisle. "It is already online." A young man near the frozen foods lifted his phone and quietly turned the screen outward. Thousands of views. Climbing by the second. Harold said nothing. He did not need to. Ellen Price stepped forward, rein still on her coat sleeve. "Judge Bennett, on behalf of the city, I am deeply sorry." Harold studied her for a moment. "Be sorry tomorrow. Tonight, be honest." She lowered her eyes. Leonard Shaw turned to Ryan with the exhausted anger of a man who knew this was not the first warning ignored. "Turn in your badge at precinct headquarters in 1 hour." Ryan blinked. "Sir, with respect, 1 hour," Shaw repeated. No one filmed Harold then. They filmed Ryan. That was the difference he had never imagined mattered. Carl quietly bagged the groceries himself. Daniel helped place the milk upright and tucked the flowers safely on top. Harold accepted the bag, then rested his palm on the handle of the cart one last time. "Officer Mercer," he said, "thank you for remembering your job is service." Daniel straightened. "Yes, sir." Harold looked once more at Ryan, not with triumph, but with disappointment that somehow felt heavier. "Young man," he said softly, "authority is loaned. Character is owned." Then he walked toward the doors, groceries in hand, while the city outside was only beginning to realize what this aisle had cost. By sunrise the next morning, the rain had moved east, but the storm it left behind was only growing. Across the city, television screens glowed inside kitchens, barber shops, waiting rooms, and office lobbies. The same video played again and again. Aisle 7, a basket of groceries, an elderly man standing with calm hands raised, a police officer speaking with confidence that vanished frame by frame. Commentators paused the footage at key moments as if truth needed slow motion to be understood. It did not. People understood immediately. Midtown Fresh Market opened an hour late because reporters had already gathered outside the entrance. Carl Peterson stood just inside the doors with a paper cup of coffee he never drank, answering the same question from every camera. "Yes," the judge was polite. "Yes," he cooperated. "Yes, I wish I had handled it differently." Regret is often fluent once witnesses arrive. At police headquarters, Officer Ryan Cole sat alone in an interview room that smelled faintly of stale air and copier toner. His uniform shirt was pressed, but his eyes were not. He had not slept. On the table before him lay a printed still image from the video, frozen at the exact second Harold Bennett had handed over his wallet. Ryan stared at it the way some men stare at mirrors after years of avoiding them. Assistant Chief Leonard Shaw entered carrying a folder thick enough to bend under its own weight. He placed it on the table without sitting down. "Do you know what this is?" Ryan tried for composure. "My statement packet." Shaw opened the folder. Complaint forms. Prior warnings. Notes from supervisors. Citizen reports that had once disappeared into routine language. "It is the stack of chances you already used." Ryan swallowed. "Sir, that call came in from the store." Shaw nodded. "And every decision after that came from you." Across town, Harold Bennett stood in a modest brick house on Willow Street arranging yellow flowers in a glass vase beside a framed photograph of his late wife. The groceries sat unpacked on the kitchen counter. Oatmeal, bread, milk, bananas. Ordinary items made extraordinary by the path they had taken home. A knock sounded at the door. Harold opened it to find attorney Marcus Reed, one of the city's most respected civil rights lawyers, carrying a leather briefcase and the expression of a man already 10 steps ahead. "Morning, Judge." Harold smiled faintly. "If you are here to make me rich, you are late by 40 years. Marcus laughed once. "I am here because the city called me before breakfast asking if I represent you." Harold stepped aside. "That sounds like panic." They sat at the kitchen table where sunlight reached through lace curtains and rested across old wood polished by decades of use. Marcus opened his briefcase. "They want quiet resolution. Immediate apology." Administrative action. Settlement discussions. Harold poured coffee into 2 mugs. Interesting order of priorities. Marcus accepted the cup. What do you want? Harold looked out the window toward the street where a mail carrier moved house to house in calm routine. I want systems to fear embarrassment less than they fear injustice. Marcus nodded slowly. Then do not settle quickly. At City Hall, Ellen Price faced a conference room full of tense officials and attorneys speaking over one another. Insurance exposure. Liability estimates. Public trust metrics. Election concerns. Someone finally asked the number no one wanted. The city attorney adjusted his glasses. If this goes to trial with punitive findings and prior pattern evidence, we could be looking at 7 figures. Silence followed, expensive and immediate. Meanwhile, Ryan walked out of headquarters carrying a cardboard box with personal items, a framed Academy photo, 2 pins, sunglasses, and a coffee mug that read Protect and Serve. He stared at the words for a long moment, then turned the mug upside down inside the box. Cameras waited outside the building, but no one shouted questions. They only recorded him leaving. Sometimes silence is louder than outrage. In his kitchen, Harold Bennett sliced a banana into oatmeal, stirred once, and said softly to no one visible, "Grace first." Then accountability. The city, however, was about to learn that accountability can be very costly. 3 days later, the city courthouse steps were lined with microphones, camera cables, and polished shoes pretending to stand for principle. Reporters clustered beneath white columns that had witnessed decades of speeches, promises, and carefully managed apologies. Inside, conference rooms filled with officials speaking in hushed urgency about optics, timelines, and damage control. Outside, citizens spoke more plainly. They talked about being stopped for no reason, watched in stores, dismissed at counters, and doubted in rooms where proof somehow always required more proof. One video had not created those stories. It had simply given them a face people could no longer ignore. Harold Bennett arrived through a side entrance at 9:10 in the morning wearing a navy suit, silver tie, and the same calm expression that had unsettled everyone in aisle 7. Attorney Marcus Reed walked beside him carrying a slim leather folder instead of the overflowing briefcase reporters expected. Marcus believed real leverage often fit in fewer pages. They entered a private mediation room on the 3rd floor where Ellen Price, 2 city attorneys, and representatives from the police department waited around a polished walnut table. Fresh coffee steamed untouched. Fear often kills appetite. Ellen stood first. "Judge Bennett, thank you for meeting with us." Harold took his seat slowly. "I came because taxpayers should not pay for dishonesty twice." No one wrote that down, but everyone remembered it. The lead city attorney adjusted his tie. "We would like to resolve this matter respectfully and efficiently." Harold looked at Marcus, then back at the attorney. Those words are usually introduced when respect and efficiency have already failed. Marcus opened the folder. Inside were not only screenshots from the market video, but copies of prior complaints involving Ryan Cole, internal notes, and training recommendations never enforced. The room changed temperature without touching the thermostat. Ellen glanced toward the police representative. "We were not aware this file was so extensive." Marcus answered for her. "That sentence is becoming expensive." The city attorney cleared his throat. "We are prepared to offer a formal public apology, disciplinary reforms, and financial compensation." Harold folded his hands. Compensation for what exactly? Emotional distress, reputational harm, unlawful detention concerns, and related claims. Harold nodded once. Then include civic harm. Because when citizens watch power behave carelessly, trust is damaged beyond one person. The police representative, Deputy Counsel Warren Pike, finally spoke. "With respect, trust is difficult to quantify." Harold's eyes settled on him. "Then your department should have protected it better." Silence followed, clean and complete. Marcus slid a single page across the table. Settlement demand. The first figure made Warren Pike inhale sharply. The second line, requiring policy changes and public reporting, made him remove his glasses. Ellen Price read every word twice. $1.3 million? She asked softly. Harold answered before Marcus could. A small number compared to what indifference has already cost. The city attorney leaned back, calculating headlines. Warren calculated budgets. Ellen calculated elections. Marcus calculated none of those things. He was watching whether conscience entered the room at all. It did not. Negotiations stretched into afternoon. Counteroffers arrived with polite language and timid numbers. Harold declined each one with the same patience he used selecting eggs. At one point Ellen asked, "Judge Bennett, is this about punishment?" Harold shook his head. "No. Punishment looks backward. Accountability protects tomorrow." By 4:15, the city returned with acceptance of the full amount, external review of complaint procedures, mandatory bias training with public audits, and quarterly reporting for 2 years. Warren Pike signed first, as men often do when they know delay costs more. Ellen signed next with the weary precision of someone inheriting another person's arrogance. Marcus signed last, then slid the pen toward Harold. He read every page carefully, changed one comma, then signed his name in steady script that had ended many arguments over the years. Outside, cameras flashed as the doors opened. Reporters shouted numbers before questions. $1.3 million spread across the plaza like electricity. Harold stepped to the microphones carrying no notes. "This was never about groceries," he said. The crowd fell silent. It was about what happens when some people must prove innocence before being treated with dignity. A reporter called out, "What will you do with the money?" Harold allowed the smallest smile. "Some of it," he said, "will teach young lawyers how to defend people who cannot afford to wait for justice." Behind him, city officials stared straight ahead. In front of him, the public finally looked back. The settlement was signed on a Thursday, but by Monday the city had already begun splitting itself into two familiar camps. One side called it overdue accountability. The other called it excessive. Radio hosts filled morning hours with opinions spoken confidently over facts they had never bothered to learn. Editorial pages asked whether taxpayers should bear the cost of one officer's judgment. Citizens answered in barber shops, church foyers, diners, and bus stops with a simpler question: why should they always bear the cost of it first? At police headquarters, new posters about professionalism appeared in hallways beside vending machines and water coolers. Fresh language, old walls. Mandatory training sessions were scheduled. Attendance was full. Enthusiasm was not. Some officers sat with folded arms, offended less by misconduct than by consequences. Others listened quietly, thinking of moments they had witnessed, and said nothing. Daniel Mercer sat in the front row taking notes no one required. He understood that reform often begins as paperwork before it becomes courage. Ryan Cole, meanwhile, rented a one-bedroom apartment on the far west side of town above a laundromat whose dryers rattled through the night. He had sold his truck, canceled the gym membership, and stopped wearing anything that looked like authority. Yet he still carried it in his posture, the stiffness of a man arguing privately with a world that had stopped agreeing with him. Every job application returned polite silence. Security firms passed. Warehouses passed. A private school withdrew interest after a parent recognized his name. He told friends he was being targeted. He never used the word consequence. One gray afternoon, he sat in a coffee shop reading comments beneath an old news clip. Strangers who had never met him described him with brutal efficiency. He closed the laptop and stared at his reflection in the dark screen. For the first time, there was no badge between him and himself. Across town, Harold Bennett stood before a classroom of 23 law students at Jefferson Community College. The room smelled faintly of markers and ambition. He had donated part of the settlement to create a scholarship fund for first-generation students entering criminal justice or public service. A brass plaque near the door now read the Dignity Fellowship. Harold disliked naming things after money. He preferred naming them after what money failed to buy. Due process, he told the class, is not paperwork. It is respect organized into procedure. Pens moved quickly. I stayed fixed on him. And prejudice, he continued, is often lazy thinking dressed as certainty. A young student in the second row raised her hand. Judge Bennett, do you forgive the officer? The room grew still. Harold rested both palms on the podium. Forgiveness is personal, he said. Accountability is public. Never confuse the two. The answer traveled beyond the room before sunset. Someone posted the clip. By evening, it was everywhere. City Hall, sensing a chance to redirect embarrassment into symbolism, announced a new civilian review initiative and invited Harold to serve as honorary chair. He declined within an hour. Ellen Price called him directly. We hoped your presence would build confidence. Harold answered kindly. Confidence built by borrowing my name will not last. She sighed, then laughed despite herself. You always make my job harder. Only when it should be, he said. That weekend, Midtown Fresh Market unveiled a renovated community notice board near the entrance. Carl Peterson had insisted on it. Job postings, legal aid flyers, tutoring programs, senior transportation numbers, food pantry hours. Above it hung a framed sentence in clean black lettering. Respect should not require credentials. Customers stopped to read it every day. Some nodded and moved on. Some stood longer than they expected. Late Sunday evening, Ryan walked past the store in a baseball cap pulled low. Through the glass, he saw the sign, the new board, and Daniel Mercer inside buying milk after shift. Daniel looked up, recognized him, and for a moment neither man moved. Ryan considered stepping inside. Instead, he kept walking into the cold. Some doors remain unlocked long after pride decides not to enter. Winter settled over the city in thin layers of frost and early darkness. But some changes had begun to take root, where people once swore nothing ever changed. Complaint forms that used to disappear into drawers were now tracked publicly online. Body camera failures required written explanations. Civilian review meetings, once attended by 5 people, and stale coffee, now filled standing room only. Progress did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like paperwork completed honestly. Daniel Mercer noticed it first in the smaller moments. Officers speaking more carefully during routine stops. Supervisors asking follow-up questions they used to wave away. Citizens still cautious, but no longer surprised when someone listened. Trust was not restored. It was simply invited back. At Jefferson Community College, the first recipients of the Dignity Fellowship gathered for a luncheon in a modest student center decorated with folding chairs and hopeful conversation. Harold Bennett moved slowly between tables, shaking hands, learning names, asking about families, majors, and rent prices with equal seriousness. One student, Maria Torres, told him she wanted to become a public defender because her father once stood in court with no lawyer and too much fear. Another, Caleb Monroe, said he planned to study data policy because numbers often hid what people refused to admit. Harold listened the way judges should, and too few ever do. Good, he told them. Fix what hurt you, but do not become shaped by it. Across town, Ryan Cole worked nights unloading delivery trucks behind a wholesale warehouse near the interstate. The pay was modest, the hours long, the fluorescent lights unforgiving. No one saluted him. No one stepped aside. Instructions came from a supervisor half his age named Terrence who judged people by punctuality and whether they stacked pallets straight. Ryan disliked him immediately for reasons that had nothing to do with Terrence. Yet week after week, Terrence remained fair, direct, and unimpressed by excuses. One night, after Ryan snapped at a coworker over a misplaced shipment, Terrence called him aside. You keep acting like every correction is disrespect, he said. Sometimes it is just correction. Ryan started to argue, then stopped. The sentence followed him home louder than traffic. Days later, he stood outside a small brick church where free counseling sessions were offered for unemployed veterans and former public employees. He stared at the door for nearly 5 minutes before walking in. Pride often waits outside while healing begins indoors. At City Hall, Ellen Price reviewed the quarterly audit report with a level of honesty politics rarely rewards. Use of force complaints were down. Community response times had improved in 3 districts. Training attendance was complete. Internal morale was mixed. Mixed, she muttered, is often the first truthful word before better ones. She requested the report be released publicly without edits. Staff members looked startled. She considered that a useful sign. Midtown Fresh Market had become an unexpected landmark. People still shopped for bread and eggs, but they also paused at the community board, reading legal aid notices beside tutoring schedules and housing resources. Carl Peterson kept extra pushpins in his pocket like medals. The framed quote remained untouched except for fingerprints on the glass, where children sometimes traced the letters. Respect should not require credentials. On a cold Friday evening, Harold returned to the store carrying the same worn wallet and a reusable bag folded in his coat pocket. A few customers recognized him. He nodded politely and continued to aisle 7. Oatmeal, bananas, milk, ordinary things again. Carl hurried over. Judge Bennett, please let me pay this time. Harold smiled. then you would deny me the pleasure of being a customer. At the next register, a man in a baseball cap lowered his head and turned away. Ryan had come in for coffee and bread after shift. Harold noticed him instantly. He also noticed the hesitation, the tired shoulders, the man trying to become invisible inside a store where once he had been too visible. Harold placed his groceries on the belt, then looked directly at him. "Mr. Cole," he said calmly. Ryan froze. The room seemed to narrow to one breath. Harold lifted the divider bar and set it behind Ryan's items. "You are next." No lecture. No crowd. No revenge. Just a place in line. Sometimes mercy exposes more than punishment ever could. Ryan Cole stood at register 4 with a loaf of bread, a can of soup, and the stunned expression of a man who had expected punishment and received something more difficult. Around him, carts rolled, scanners beeped. Doors opened and closed with winter air, yet the store felt briefly suspended between who people had been and who they might still become. Harold Bennett placed his groceries on the belt with the same calm precision he carried into every room. Ryan looked at the floor. "You do not have to do that," he said quietly. Harold adjusted the flowers in his bag and answered, "Correct. I chose to." The cashier, the same young woman who had witnessed everything months earlier, said nothing. She only scanned items slowly, sensing some moments should not be rushed. Ryan swallowed. "I was wrong." The words came rough and used, expensive. Harold nodded once. "Yes." No speech followed. No dramatic absolution. Truth did not need decoration. Ryan tried again. "I keep thinking about that night." Harold looked at him. "Good. Memory is useful when it leads somewhere." The cashier handed Ryan his receipt. He reached for his wallet, but Harold had already paid for both orders. Ryan stiffened. "I cannot accept that." Harold took his own bag and left Ryan's on the counter between them. Then earn it by doing better for someone else. He turned toward the doors and began walking out into the cold evening. Ryan grabbed his bag and followed several steps behind, not chasing, simply unwilling to let the moment end unfinished. Outside, the parking lot lights glowed over patches of old snow. Their breath rose in pale clouds. Cars passed on the boulevard beyond the lot, carrying people with private worries and no idea a small reckoning was happening beside cart returns and shopping carts. "Judge Bennett," Ryan called. Harold stopped. "When people look at me now, all they see is that video." Harold faced him fully. "For a season, perhaps." Ryan stared at the asphalt. "And after that?" Harold's answer came without hesitation. "They will see what you practice next." Ryan's eyes lifted for the first time. "You really believe people can change?" Harold glanced toward the store windows where the community board was visible near the entrance. "I believe people can choose. Change is what repeated choices become." Wind moved across the lot, sharp and clean. Ryan nodded slowly as if hearing a language. He once mocked and now needed. "I started counseling," he admitted. "I work nights. I am trying." Harold considered him for a long second. Trying is private. Character becomes public eventually. Then he opened the trunk of an older sedan polished with care rather than money and placed his groceries inside. Before closing it, he removed the bouquet of yellow flowers and handed them to Ryan. "Take these to someone you disappointed," he said. "Start there." Ryan accepted them with both hands. He looked suddenly younger, not because years had vanished, but because certainty had. Harold closed the trunk and got into the driver's seat. As he rolled down the window, Ryan stepped closer. "Why help me after everything?" Harold rested one arm on the door. "Because if pain is all we pass forward, it keeps collecting interest." He drove away slowly, taillights fading into traffic. Weeks became months. Spring returned in cautious green. Ryan continued counseling, kept the warehouse job, and later volunteered at a youth mentorship program where teenagers trusted no uniform and tested every promise. He listened more than he spoke. Daniel Mercer, now promoted to sergeant, helped lead new training classes built around dignity, procedure, and restraint. Ellen Price won no awards for releasing unedited audits, but she slept better. The Dignity Fellowship funded its second class of students. Midtown Fresh Market sold bread, milk, bananas, and more ordinary miracles than anyone counted. On a bright April morning, Harold Bennett addressed graduating scholars in a crowded auditorium. He stood at the podium, silver tie straight, voice steady. "Some people think justice arrives with noise," he said. "Often it arrives quietly, in forms, in votes, in courage, in the decision to treat a stranger as fully human before they prove anything to you. The room rose in applause. Harold waited, then added one final line that followed people long after they left their seats. Respect costs nothing. Disrespect sends the bill later.